It is Friday, December 6, 2013, and I am in the middle of my alternative spiritual practice of protesting against Unitarian Universalist injustices, abuses, and hypocrisy in front of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, except tonight I'm not in front of the Unitarian Church of Montreal. I'm at the rear entrance area where the driveway is. As we can see here, there's a parking lot behind the church and there's a rear entrance door, and as we can see there's a ramp leading into the parking lot. And the reason I'm here is because there's construction in front of the church that is constricting access to the front. It's not as bad as it was last Sunday, but I am assuming, and perhaps wrongly assuming, that most people entering the church tonight will be coming in this way rather than the front. But I could be wrong about that because the sidewalk is quite a bit clearer than it was. So I may change my position. It's actually been fairly quiet. I've already protested for half an hour. Had a little verbal tussle with David Rollert, the husband of Reverend Diane Rollert. And so I had a bit of a monologue going around that. So the reason I'm here tonight, the 6th of December, Friday the 6th of December, is because it's the 5th day of Chalica, which is a annual holiday / observance that is dedicated to the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism. It's a week-long observance, each day being dedicated to one of the principles of Unitarian Universalism. And tonight is dedicated to the 5th principle of Unitarian Universalism, which affirms and promotes the right of conscience and use of the democratic process in Unitarian Universalist congregations and society at large. So, in light of the numerous ways in which Montreal Unitarians and the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations have gone to extreme lengths to prevent me from exercising my right of conscience, and have also misused and abused the democratic process, and have also, and yes, the woman walking here is a former leader, I believe a former president of the board, and one of the people who was involved in Reverend Diane Rollert's attempt to obtain a restraining order against me, which was successful on the basis of what I consider to be paranoid fantasies and perjurious lies, one or the other, or a combination of both. In terms of the bigger picture, I would say it was a combination of both. And if it wasn't paranoid fantasies, it was definitely perjurious lies, put it that way. I mean, definitely Reverend Diane Rollert told a few lies that are easily provable in sworn testimony in court. So as far as that goes, she was definitely telling lies in sworn testimony, and I can prove that. So then the question is, well, was she really very frightened of me as she claimed to be? It's within possibility that she was. All I can say is that if Reverend Diane Rollert was very frightened of me, she basically was quite delusional, because I've never said or done anything that should really cause anyone to be very frightened of me. So if she was, all I can say is she was, at best, deeply insecure, and at worst, suffering from paranoid delusions. So anyway, we are here in part precisely because one of the many ways that Montreal Unitarians have tried to prevent me from engaging in peaceful public protest, and in fact one of the most successful efforts that they ever had, was Reverend Diane Rollert's attempt to get a restraining order against me on the basis that she claimed to be very frightened of me. And she also claimed that I had screamed at her when I'd done no such thing. And we got a police car coming here. And 11-2, so yeah, that's the station that handles this section. So we'll see if anything happens. But yes, this actually is, again, part of the whole big picture is when I protest, when I exercise my constitutionally guaranteed right to engage in peaceful public protest, as I'm doing right now, which is, as can be seen, pretty darn peaceful. Basically a guy walking back and forth with a picket sign in each hand and a few freestanding picket signs leaning up against the posts and things. Not making a lot of noise, not as a rule shouting and yelling or anything like that. So about as peaceful as you can get. Nonetheless, Montreal Unitarians repeatedly call in complaints to the police to try and have my protest shut down by the SPVM police force. And in fact, on rather too many occasions, SPVM police officers have abused their authority in terms of trying to intimidate me into ending my protest with threats of tickets and so on, even threats of arrest. And I have actually been ticketed in very questionable ways by the SPVM police. And, when it gets right down to it, I actually have been arrested a few times on bullshit criminal charges and so on. Yes, as far as it goes, one of the most egregious attempts by the Unitarian Church of Montreal to force an end to my protest was in early December of 2000. So in fact, we're just past the 13th anniversary of this attempt by the Unitarian Church of Montreal to prevent me from protesting in front of the church. On December 3rd, I believe, of the 2000, it was, put it this way, it was the first Sunday in the year 2000. I was protesting in front of the church, and I was arrested. And when I asked the police officer, why I was being arrested, he said for public nuisance. And I said, well, what kind of public nuisance? And he said, disrupting church service. And it turns out that there's a section of the Canadian Criminal Code that prohibits disrupting the order and solemnity of a religious service. I can't remember the exact words, but essentially that's it. It's disrupting the order and solemnity of a religious service. And it can even be a meeting held for moral purpose. So it doesn't even have to be necessarily a religious meeting, but a meeting held for a moral purpose. So the Unitarian Church of Montreal was trying to have this law applied to my peaceful public protest outside the church, which is very quiet, almost invisible to the church members inside the church when the service is actually going on. So it was basically a complete misuse and abuse of this section of the Criminal Code, which is obviously intended to dissuade people from actually disrupting church services, inside the church itself, or doing something of such a nature so near to the church that it actually does disrupt the service. I made it clear to the Crown Prosecutor that I could not be seen very well from inside the church because the church sanctuary only had a few slit windows. The people in the church sat at a 90-degree angle to those windows. So in other words, in order to see me during my protest, during the actual church service, the people in the service would have to be looking to their right, over their shoulder, away from where the minister is delivering the sermon, and they'd maybe catch a little glimpse of me as I walked past the slit window. So basically, I cannot be seen, within the sanctuary. The church is pretty soundproof, and I don't make much noise anyway, so I can basically not be heard inside the church. So I basically tried to persuade the Crown Prosecutor to drop the charges. He refused, saying he had witnesses. So, okay, fine. So we went to trial. To make a long story short, we went to trial. And to make a 3-year-long story very short, I was acquitted. When the Crown Prosecutor was unable to prove a single one of the 4 or 5 points of law that he had to prove beyond any reasonable doubt to obtain a conviction. I represented myself. I was so sure that this was total bullshit, that the chances of actually being convicted were so minimal that I decided I had no need for a lawyer, and I represented myself. And I can say that I quite enjoyed doing that. It was a lot of fun, actually. I get to cross-examine the church's prosecution witnesses myself. I cross-examined the police officer who arrested me, and so on. And because I'm representing myself, I'm actually able to, basically be really on the ball in terms of the facts and so on. A lawyer who's representing me may not even be aware of all the facts, but because I'm representing myself, I can, quickly adapt to a situation, when a witness is answering my questions. And so basically, here's how I won the trial. It took, there was actually a lot of cross-examination, but essentially, I won the trial in about 90 seconds in the following manner. One of the church witnesses, a guy by the name of Val Bourdon, was being cross-examined by me. And I asked him, can you hear me inside the church when church services are taking place? He answered no, which is the correct answer. So then I asked Val Bourdon, can you see me inside the church when church services are going on? And he said yes. Now I knew, based on what I've just said earlier, that this was basically not true. So I asked Val Bourdon, how can you see me? How can people see me inside the church, when services are going on? His answer was, people are staring at you out the lobby windows. Well, it is true that the Unitarian Church of Montreal does have a glass atrium lobby. And it is true that some people do in fact stare at me out the windows on occasion of this atrium. So the next question to Val Bourdon was, do you celebrate church services in the lobby? And Val Bourdon's answer was a long, drawn-out, mournful no kind of thing. It really was very much like that. I might be exaggerating a little bit, but it was basically no. So yeah, strike two. So then I asked Val Bourdon, has the church service ever actually been disrupted as a result of my protest outside the church? And he again answered yes. So I had to ask Val Bourdon, well, how has a church service actually been disrupted? And he said, oh, well, I feel terribly uncomfortable inside when you're out there protesting. I feel really bad, and so on and so forth. And so I had to say to Val Bourdon, and actually, this is actually slightly going against court procedure, because you're not supposed to make statements when you're cross-examining someone. You're supposed to only ask questions. And I probably got a little rap on the knuckle from the judge, but I essentially made it clear to Val Bourdon that that this wasn't about how individual people felt. This was about whether or not a service had actually been disrupted. It wasn't about how you feel while the service is going on. It's about the service itself. So I asked Val Bourdon, I said, has a church service ever stopped and started again as a result of my protest outside the church? And he answered no. Strike three, you're out. So it actually took me longer to recount that than the actual question and answer. And, you know, it really was within less than 2 minutes, question and answer. And a very similar series of question and answer with another church prosecution witness, Jeremy Searle, who basically, you know, same kind of thing. You know, when I asked him about church service being disrupted, he too went on about, you know, how terribly uncomfortable he felt when I was out there protesting and so on. You know, so that was it. You know, these church prosecution witnesses, you know, after a little bit of extra questioning, after their initial answers, all admitted that A, I could not be heard from inside the church when I'm protesting. B, I could not be seen inside the sanctuary of the church where services are held, you know, when service is going on. And C, no service had actually ever been disrupted. Which is kind of silly, isn't it, when you think that, you know, the whole charge against me was for disrupting the order and solemnity of a church service. You know, and these people, upon further cross-examination, after their initial claims that, you know, that church services had been disrupted, admitted that, nope, no church service was actually ever disrupted in terms of the actual service itself. So why I was even arrested is open to question. Why the Crown prosecutor thought he had a case when he obviously didn't is also open to question. All I can say actually is that this young fellow, he was quite young, was probably told a whole pile of bullshit by church members and sort of got sucked in by their testimony prior to the trial. I must say he was actually quite honorable in his own treatment of me, and when it became clear that that he had no case at all, he actually spoke up and asked the judge, well, actually, I don't know if he asked the judge or he asked me, but he might have asked me via the judge or suggested to the judge that I do something, which was to move for a motion of non-suit. There is such a thing as a motion of non-suit, that a person charged with a crime can apply in a trial, and essentially it's a motion saying that the prosecutor has failed to prove his case, and therefore the person who's being prosecuted should be acquitted. So essentially the prosecutor wanted me to make this motion so that it would be the end of the trial. Being the kind of guy I was and am, I did not want to make a motion of non-suit. I wanted to be able to actually present a defense, even though it was obvious I had no need to actually present a defense. I wanted to be able to present one so that I could just prove how incredibly foolish, you know, these people had been. You know, in presenting a defense, I could go over all of their testimony and show how disingenuous they'd been, how dishonest they'd been, you know, how they tried to misuse and abuse the criminal code to shut down a perfectly legitimate, peaceful public protest. Oh, here's another reason why I sometimes raise my voice, as I did now. There's traffic noise. Those buses can be pretty loud, and you know, sometimes if I'm talking and there's a bus around, or even, you know, a somewhat loud car, I do raise my voice. You know, I usually just shut up. Usually, if there's a bus making a lot of noise, I just, especially if I'm in one of these monologues, you know, just explaining the protest while I'm walking back and forth, you know, I just stop talking while the bus is making all noise, and I start again once it's finished. But the point here is that Reverend Diane Rollert, you know, accused me of screaming at her when I did no such thing. This was, I believe, an attempt on her part to try and portray me as, you know, mentally unstable, prone to anger, and so on. You know, basically trying to reinforce her case about being very frightened of me. That's that, you know. I mean, yes, I do raise my voice every now and then. As I said in the previous video clip, the previous half-hour segment, which may actually be split into two shorter segments because my camera's acting up and it seems to sort of hiccup at 17 minutes. So I get a 17-minute segment and then a 12, 13-minute segment. What I'm getting at here, though, is that in this initial half-hour period, quite early in it, David Rollert confronted me and tried to shame me about protesting on a night when one of the things that's happening is service, or I don't know if it's a service, but it's like some kind of observance that is commemorating the girls who were shot by one Marc Lepine at the École Polytechnique some years ago on a December 6th. Basically David Rollert is saying, I have no shame protesting on such a night. Well, in fact, I have very good reason to protest specifically in conjunction with that event. And it all comes down to the ways that the church has tried to shut down this protest, the ways in which the Unitarian Church of Montreal has misused and abused the Canadian Criminal Code to try to force an end to this protest, which is in clear violation of the fifth principle, which calls for respect for everyone's right of conscience and use of the democratic process in society at large. Well, peaceful public protest is part of the use of the democratic process in society at large. In fact, it's one of the last resorts of the democratic process in society at large. So essentially, David Rollert was trying to say, I should be ashamed, not that I should. He actually said I had no shame, that I'm totally shameless. Well, no, I actually gave some serious thought to whether or not I should do this protest tonight, and I do understand the reasons why it might be more seemly not to. But I'm not protesting against that commemoration. In fact, I didn't even know about it until I checked the church website just prior to coming tonight. And my main number one reason for being here tonight specifically is because it's the fifth day of Chalica, and it is dedicated to the right of conscience, the use of democratic process. It's basically the best night of Chalica to engage in peaceful public protest against the fact that the Unitarian Universalists have made a total mockery of the fifth principle. And in part, this has been done by Reverend Diane Rollert seeking a restraining order against me, in which she and other members of the Unitarian Church of Montreal tried to pretend that I was a Marc Lepine kind of guy. Reverend Diane Rollert herself, to the best of my knowledge, at least in terms of her depositions to the police, at least in terms of her testimony in court, to the best of my recollection, never actually portrayed me as someone who was going to come into the church and shoot and kill people. I don't recall her going that far, but she did claim to be very frightened of me and so on. And unfortunately, she did round up a bunch. This is a church member making a lot of noise as she passes me because she wants to block out this protest. She's done it before, so she's just singing this silly song as she passes me, just to basically, be the ostrich with the head in the sand kind of thing. So anyway, getting back to tonight's protest and the whole issue of the commemoration of Marc Lepine's shooting of a bunch of students at the École Polytechnique. Even though she didn't come right out and say this herself, Reverend Diane Roller did round up various church members to make depositions to the police of a similar nature to hers, basically claiming to be very frightened of me. And at least one of them, a guy by the name of Sean Doring, made a deposition to the police in which he claimed, that he was very afraid that I was going to come into the church and shoot people to death. And he even went so far as to say that this was an imminent threat. We're talking now 2007, 2008 or so, basically 5 years ago or more. Now, the fact of the matter is, in this whole protest, which began in 1998, so it's now more than 15 years it's been going on, because it began in May of 1998. It is now December of 2013. In that whole time period, I have never caused the slightest physical harm to any Montreal Unitarian. On the contrary, I've actually been assaulted a few times by various Montreal Unitarians, and even one, definitely one non-Unitarian, a rather uppity rabbi who was visiting the church, assaulted me. But mainly we're talking a few members of the Unitarian Church of Montreal. So I've actually been physically assaulted. I've been pushed and shoved. I haven't, to the best of my knowledge, actually been punched, but a few members of the church had a fist right in front of my face, ready to punch me in the face. And another member, who didn't actually assault me, nonetheless threatened me. He saw me protesting one Sunday, and he said to me, "Come back here next week and I'll punch your fucking lights out." To make a long story short, I reported his threat to the police. It was taken seriously. It was even considered to be a form of death threat. He was subjected to non-judicial treatment for his criminal act. And that's that. I could go into more detail, but the point being is, I've never caused any kind of physical harm to any member of the church. I've never made any threat of any physical violence of a realistic nature to any Unitarian Universalist. I have, in the past, invented this imaginary navy, the UU Jihad Navy. So this is just basically an imaginary navy that I put on the blog. This all arose out of a parody article that appeared in the San Francisco Chronicle by a columnist whose last name was Carroll. His first name I'm not quite remembering right now. So anyway, he came up with this parody article, Unitarian Jihad. It was all about how Unitarians are so nicey nice. And oui. Avenue qui? Quoi?
Prince-Albert.
Je connais pas.
C'est par ici.
Je ne sais pas. Peut-être la meilleure chose à faire, il y a une station de métro pas loin.
Oui, mais je sais que j'avais pris pour aller au métro.
Ouais, il y a un cadre dans le métro, mais peut-être vous pouvez demander aux autres. Mais oui, je pense que c'est à l'est, mais je ne suis pas certain. Je ne connais pas. Oui. So I just got interrupted by a woman asking for directions. So yeah, this monologue is going on, but basically, since I've started recording these, it looks like we're almost done, another half hour. Since I've basically kept the camera running, and one of the reasons is precisely for what I'm talking about. I have been assaulted, I have been threatened by Unitarians. I've also had false allegations made against me by Unitarians, so I keep the camera running almost constantly now to protect myself from false allegations by so again, here we have some fairly loud traffic noise. So as I was saying, I've had false allegations made against me by Unitarians. That's the number one reason why I keep this camera running pretty constantly. But there are others. They are recording when Unitarians behave badly, and also keeping track of my interactions with